Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a deeply unsettling yet absolutely crucial chapter of human history. We're going to look at exactly how severe socioeconomic despair paved the way for the most devastating global conflict we have ever seen, World War II.
To really grasp the weight of this, let's actually start our story just after the catastrophe ends, with an 11-year-old German boy named Helmut. The source material explains that Helmut was so utterly terrified in the aftermath of the war, he actually refused to eat at home for 9 long years. I mean, he lived in this constant, agonizing fear that his own mother would poison his food. Now, why on earth would a young child believe something so horrific?
Well, it all stems from a deeply disturbing moment. You see, Helmut overheard his Nazi-supporting father utter these chilling words to his mother. "Now they will do to us what we did to them." Right after saying this, his father walked into his office and committed suicide. This stark anecdote brilliantly illustrates the pervasive atmosphere of guilt, paranoia, and just sheer terror that blanketed post-war Germany. It wasn't just a military defeat, it was a total psychological collapse for those who had upheld this catastrophic ideology.
Okay, moving on to Section 1, the Seeds of Fear. To understand this ultimate tragedy, we have to flash back and look at the catalyst that birthed this radical ideology in the first place.
The source details how Adolf Hitler, who was originally an aspiring artist from Austria devastated by personal tragedies and art school rejections, found a twisted sense of purpose in World War I. He joined the German army, served as a messenger, and fought in brutal battles like the Somme, Arras, and Passchendaele. He was even wounded and awarded the Iron Cross. But when Germany lost, he just refused to accept reality. Instead, he used Germany's defeat to foster this deep-seated hatred, basing his entire worldview on a fabricated stab-in-the-back myth. He baselessly blamed civilian leaders, Marxists, and Jewish people for the military loss.
That brings us to Section 2, a nation in despair. Following the First World War, the newly established democratic government in Germany, the Weimar Republic, was left incredibly vulnerable.
Let's look at why. The Treaty of Versailles was a humiliating blow that systematically stripped Germany of its essential resources and land. And the numbers here are just staggering. Germany instantly lost 10% of its population and 13% of its territory. But economically, it was even worse. They lost 75% of their iron resources and 26% of their coal. You can imagine how this completely crippled the young democratic government's ability to recover, and it naturally sparked massive public resentment.
To make matters worse, the Allied power slammed Germany with a crushing reparations debt of £6.6 billion. Because they couldn't afford this, and because foreign powers actually began occupying their industrial areas, the German government was forced into printing excess money. This triggered a hyperinflation crisis so severe that the currency became utterly worthless. Seriously, imagine a scenario where a literal wheelbarrow full of cash could barely buy you a single loaf of bread.
And right as they were grappling with that, following closely on the heels of hyperinflation, the global Great Depression hit. Foreign financial support, particularly from the US, vanished practically overnight. This left a staggering 6 million Germans completely unemployed, and industrial production was slashed by 40%. The country was, for all intents and purposes, broken.
Section 3. Seizing absolute power. The crucial point here is that this widespread desperation provided the absolute perfect breeding ground for an extremist promising a better future.
And we see this rapid, methodical dismantling of German democracy happen in just a few short years. In 1932, exploiting the economic panic, the Nazi Party won roughly 38 million votes. By January 1933, President Hindenburg appointed Hitler as chancellor. Just a month later, a mysterious fire at the Reichstag Parliament building gave the new chancellor the perfect excuse to enact emergency powers, systematically stripping citizens of their civil rights. Before 1933 was even over, the Enabling Act was passed, banning all other parties and unions and fully transitioning those civil rights into absolute dictatorial control.
Let's turn to Section 4, the catastrophic World War II. Now we shift our focus to analyze how this absolute domestic power inevitably dragged the entire globe into a catastrophic war of unprecedented scale.
So despite initially hiring economist Hjalmar Schacht to fix the economy, which honestly did see some early success, Hitler quickly ignored his financial warnings. Schacht knew the state simply couldn't afford massive military spending. But the dictator determined that the only way to secure the vast resources Germany needed to survive and thrive was through violent, aggressive territorial expansion. It was a decision that fundamentally guaranteed a catastrophic clash with the rest of the world.
The steps toward war escalated incredibly fast. Step 1.
pulling Germany out of the League of Nations in 1933. Step 2. Annexing Austria and Czechoslovakia in 1938, aggressively testing the boundaries of international appeasement. And finally, Step 3. The unprovoked invasion of Poland in September 1939. This final act of aggression forced Britain and France to honor their treaties and declare war, which formally ignited the deadliest conflict in human history.
Looking at the trajectory of what followed is deeply tragic. Initially, the Axis had immense power, an alliance with Italy and Japan, and vast military success sweeping across Western Europe by 1940. But their downfall was sealed by fatal errors driven by sheer hubris. First, the 1941 betrayal and invasion of the Soviet Union created a disastrous two-front war, resulting in tens of millions of casualties on the Eastern Front alone. Second, Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor brought the immense industrial and military might of the United States into the fight, turning a continental conflict into a truly global meat grinder.
The military catastrophe ultimately ended right back where it started. The Soviet Union relentlessly pushed the German army back to the decimated streets of Berlin. Refusing to flee the capital, Hitler retreated to a bunker. He actually consulted his physician, Dr. Werner Hayes, for the most effective suicide methods. In the end, the dictator who started the deadliest conflict in history committed suicide using a pistol and poison, choosing to die rather than face the monumental consequences of his actions.
This leads us to our final part, Section 5, Ideology and Destruction. Because beyond the battlefield, we must understand the horrific domestic ideology that ran parallel to the military destruction.
Impartially analyzing the source material reveals a society built on an extreme racial hierarchy, placing blonde, blue-eyed Aryans at the absolute top, and Jewish people, along with other minorities, at the very bottom. This ideology culminated in the final solution, the Nazi policy resulting in the systematic mass murder of Jewish people in gas chambers alongside other horrific genocides that forever shamed humanity.
And the state ruthlessly engineered this society starting from the ground up with the youth, enforcing incredibly strict archaic gender roles. Boys were expected to be aggressive, strong, masculine soldiers ready to die for the state. Girls, on the other hand, were taught that equality was a total myth. They were expected to be completely submissive mothers whose only purpose was breeding pure-blooded Aryans. This brainwashing was literally printed directly into their school textbooks.
The source outlines these chilling measures, demonstrating how the state eradicated any trace of equality to force conformity. They fired all Jewish teachers and segregated children in classrooms. In a display of pure cruelty, they even murdered physically handicapped children in gas chambers just because they didn't fit the perfect physical mold. Women were treated as state property, rewarded for birthing desirable children, and punished for birthing those deemed undesirable.
Connecting back to our opening story about young Helmut terrified in his own home, the ultimate takeaway here is crystal clear. This regime brought nothing but unprecedented devastation to both its countless victims and, ultimately, its own citizens. As the saying goes, war only brings destruction.
The only silver lining to this immense global tragedy was a harsh awakening for the rest of the world. The international community realized that global cooperation organizations, like the United Nations, were desperately and immediately needed to prevent a global catastrophe like this from ever happening again.
So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final provocative question. How fragile is democracy when faced with severe economic despair? When a nation's people are starving, broke, and humiliated, history shows us just how quickly a society can fracture and give away its freedoms. It's an incredibly important lesson to carry forward. Thanks so much for joining me to explore this vital history today.